The backstage area was clearing out, but she remained. Kurt noticed her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she seemed to belong to a different era entirely. While everyone else was rushing around in the post-show chaos, packing equipment and discussing the next venue, this woman sat perfectly still on a folding chair near the exit, her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for communion. She couldn't have been more than 65, but something about her suggested she'd lived several lifetimes. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a vintage band t-shirt that looked authentic, not the trendy reproductions that kids bought at mall stores, but the real thing, faded and soft from decades of wear. A leather jacket hung over her shoulders, cracked with age but well maintained, like a beloved book that had been read countless times. Kurt had seen plenty of older fans at shows, parents who'd been dragged along by their kids, curious boomers trying to understand what their children were listening to. But this woman was different. She wasn't here by accident. She belonged here in a way that most people, regardless of age, never would. The venue was one of those mid-sized clubs that had seen better days, the kind of place where legends had played before they were legends, where the walls absorbed decades of music and sweat and dreams. Tonight's show had been electric, the kind of performance that reminded Kurt why he'd started playing in the first place. But now, in the fluorescent aftermath, reality was settling back in. "Excuse me?" Kurt turned toward the voice. The woman had approached him while he was packing his guitar, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to waste energy. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice carrying the remnants of what had probably once been a sultry smoker's rasp. "I know you must be tired. I wanted to thank you for tonight." Up close, Kurt could see the toll that time had taken on her face. But her eyes were still bright, still alive with the kind of passion that Kurt recognized in hardcore music fans. There was something else there too, a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. "No problem," Kurt said, setting down his guitar case. "Did you enjoy the show?" The woman's smile was complicated, happy but tinged with sadness. "More than you know. It's been a while since I've felt music like that." Kurt studied her face, trying to read the story written there. "You've been to a lot of shows." The woman laughed, and for a moment, Kurt could hear echoes of a younger version of herself. "Oh, honey, I've been following music since before you were born. Started in the 60s, saw Hendrix at Woodstock, followed Zeppelin across 3 states in 75, spent the 80s chasing punk bands through dive bars that don't exist anymore." Kurt felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just a fan. This was someone who'd lived the life that most people only dreamed about. Someone who'd been there for the moments that became legends. "That's incredible," he said, and he meant it. "You must have some amazing stories." The woman's expression darkened slightly. "Stories, yes. Lots of stories." She paused, seeming to weigh something in her mind. "Can I ask you something? Do you mind if I sit down for a minute? I don't have as much energy as I used to." Kurt gestured toward a nearby couch that had seen better decades. As they settled in, he noticed the woman's hands were trembling slightly, and her breathing seemed more labored than it should be for someone who'd just been sitting. "What's your name?" Kurt asked gently. Diana Morrison." She adjusted her jacket, and Kurt caught a glimpse of several vintage band pins attached to the lapel. "Most people called me Dee. Still do, I guess, though there aren't many people left who remember." "Dee," Kurt repeated. "You said you wanted to ask me something?" Dee looked down at her hands, then back up at Kurt. Her eyes held a kind of desperate honesty that made Kurt's stomach tighten. "I'm dying," she said simply. No preamble, no sugar-coating, just the truth, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd had time to make peace with it. "Cancer. The doctors gave me 6 weeks. That was 5 weeks ago. Kurt felt like someone had punched him in the gut. Jesus, I'm sorry. That's terrible. Dee waved her hand dismissively. Don't be sorry. I've had a good run. Better than most people get. But that's not why I'm telling you this. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes intense. I'm telling you because tonight was my last show, my last time hearing live music, and I wanted it to be something real, something that mattered. Kurt didn't know what to say. The backstage area around them continued its slow-motion breakdown, roadies coiling cables and breaking down equipment. But it all felt distant now, like background noise in someone else's movie. Why our show? He asked finally. I mean, with all the bands you've seen, all the history you've experienced. Dee's smile was sad but genuine. Because you remind me why I started following music in the first place. Back in the 60s, it wasn't about fame or money or any of that bullshit. It was about truth, about artists who were willing to bleed a little on stage to show you something real. She gestured toward Kurt's guitar case. That's what you do. Every time you play, you show people something true about what it means to be human. Kurt felt his throat tighten. He'd been complimented on his music before, by critics, by fans, by other musicians. But something about Dee's words hit him differently. Maybe it was the context, the knowledge that this was coming from someone who was literally dying, someone who had nothing to gain by lying. You know what the hardest part is? Dee continued, her voice getting softer. It's not the dying. I've made peace with that. It's the loneliness. I spent my whole life following music instead of building a traditional life. Never got married, never had kids. Music was my family. Musicians were my lovers. Venues were my home. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Seemed romantic when I was 20. Less so when you're facing the end alone. Kurt looked at this woman, this person who dedicated her entire existence to something he dedicated his existence to, and felt a profound sense of recognition. How many times had he chosen music over relationships? How many bridges had he burned in service of his art? Do you regret it? He asked. The choices you made? Dee considered this for a long moment. That's complicated. I got to see things that most people never see. I was there when unknown bands became legends. I saw raw talent before it got packaged and sold. I lived inside the music in a way that very few people ever do. She paused, looking around the venue with eyes that seemed to be seeing decades of similar rooms. But I also spent a lot of nights alone in hotel rooms, a lot of years drifting between scenes without ever really belonging to any of them. Kurt felt something cold settle in his chest. Was this his future? Was this where the road he was on led? To dying alone in a hospital room, surrounded by memories instead of people? The thing is, Dee continued, I wouldn't trade the music for anything. Even knowing how it ends, even knowing I'm going to die alone, I wouldn't change it. Because music is the closest thing to magic that humans ever created. And I got to be part of that magic for 40 years. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook, worn and coffee-stained. I kept a journal. Every show I went to, every musician I met, every moment that felt important. 40 years of music history, written down by someone who was actually there. Kurt looked at the notebook with something approaching awe. That's incredible. That's a historical document. It's my life, Dee said simply. And when I'm gone, it'll just be a bunch of scribbles in a book that nobody will know how to read. She held the notebook for a moment longer, then tucked it back into her jacket. But that's okay. The music doesn't need my stories to keep existing. It just keeps going, from generation to generation, finding new voices, new ways to tell the truth. Kurt felt overwhelmed by the weight of what Dee was sharing with him. Here was someone who'd lived the music life to its absolute extreme, and she was offering him a glimpse of what that really meant, both the beauty and the cost. "Can I ask you something?" Kurt said. "Of all the shows you've been to, all the musicians you've known, what was the most important moment? The one that made it all worth it?" Dee's face transformed. For a moment, the years fell away, and Kurt could see the young woman she'd once been, passionate, fearless, alive with the possibility of music. 1969, she said, a little club in Detroit that doesn't exist anymore. I was following this band called MC5, raw, political, dangerous. But that night, they brought out this kid as an opener. Couldn't have been more than 17, skinny as a rail, with this beat-up guitar that looked like it might fall apart if you looked at it wrong. Kurt leaned forward, drawn into the story. He played 3 songs, just him and that guitar. No backup, no effects, just pure honesty. And in those 3 songs, he told the story of every kid who'd ever felt like they didn't belong, every teenager who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, every young person who'd ever looked at the world and thought it was broken. Dee's eyes were bright with memory. When he finished, there were maybe 50 people in that room, and every single one of them was crying. Not because the music was sad, but because it was true. Because this kid had managed to take all the pain and confusion of being young and alive and scared, and he'd turned it into something beautiful. "What happened to him?" Kurt asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Overdosed 2 years later," Dee said quietly. "Never made it out of Detroit. Never got famous, never got recorded. But for those 3 songs, in that little club, he was everything that music could be. Pure and honest and unafraid." Kurt felt something break open in his chest. "That's why you do it. That's why you followed music all these years, looking for that feeling again." "Looking for that truth," Dee corrected. "The feeling you can manufacture, you can fake. But truth is rare. Most musicians never find it. Most music never touches it. But when it happens..." She trailed off, lost in memory. "Tonight," Kurt said slowly. "Did you find it tonight?" Dee looked at him with eyes that held decades of experience. "What do you think?" Kurt thought about the show, the way the crowd had responded, the way the music had felt flowing out of him. He thought about the songs he'd played, the emotions he'd tried to convey, the truth he'd tried to share. "I think," he said carefully, "that I was trying to tell the truth. I don't know if I succeeded, but I was trying." Dee nodded. "That's all any of us can do. Try to be honest. Try to share something real. Whether people hear it or not, whether it changes anything or not, that's out of our control." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of breakdown continuing around them. Kurt found himself looking at Dee differently now, not as a fan or even as a person, but as a fellow traveler on the strange journey that music demanded from those who chose to live inside it. "Dee," he said finally, "can I play something for you? I mean, just for you. Not a show, not a performance, just music." Dee's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that. I know you're tired, and I'm sure you have places to be." "I want to," Kurt said, and he meant it. "You've given music your whole life. The least I can do is give you a few more minutes of it." Kurt stood up and retrieved his acoustic guitar from its case. It was his personal instrument, the one he used for writing, for late-night hotel room sessions when he couldn't sleep. The strings were old, and the neck was worn smooth from years of playing, but it was honest in a way that his stage guitars, for all their power and volume, sometimes weren't. He settled back onto the couch and began to tune the guitar. "Any requests?" Dee shook her head. "Just play something true." Kurt closed his eyes and let his fingers find their way across the strings. He didn't play any of Nirvana's songs, didn't reach for anything recognizable or commercial. Instead, He played something that came from the same place as the kid in Detroit that Dee had described, something raw and honest and